All right, you ready?
Good morning, buddy.
Morning, Dan. How's it going?
We've been talking for 3 hours, and now just
And now we're
turning on
recording.
record.
Love it.
Let's do it.
We're back in the basement. I wanted to say real quick, because I mentioned the basement a couple times previously. This is the basement of our house, my house, not your house. This is the basement of the house.
Correct.
The house was built sometime in the 1700s. And when we were thinking about where we were going to record, this was really the only spot we could come up with.
Right.
But it actually worked out pretty well as we started thinking about making this into a recording space, because we've got literally the stone and mortar wall behind us. And hopefully we've got enough insulation that we don't hear kids running around upstairs and all that. So anyway,
And
want
we
to give
can
some
make
context.
meaning out of this, but the wall symbolizes a 300-year-old place-based business. I
Right,
mean, this
right.
place has been that which are what we're talking about for hundreds of years, which is really cool.
Yeah. We didn't think about that when we first picked the
Just came to
spot.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. But we're like, hey, you know what? Good meeting.
works.
Good
Yeah.
meeting there. So today we want to talk about we want to get more into your story with your farm and bakery. And we talked about previously about the first chapter of your adult life in the military as an Army Ranger. You shared an amazing story about almost dying in a sandstorm as you were with a small group of other soldiers going out to get provisions to save the lives of your other fellow soldiers and bring those provisions back. And anyway, you guys got lost in the sandstorm by God's grace in the middle of being lost and not being able to see your hand in front of your face because of the sandstorm. You were able to find these bags of waters and ice and food and all the stuff that you needed to literally survive. So powerful snapshot of that whole chapter of your life as an active duty soldier. And I'm interested today to talk about your decision to leave the military and what that was to go from military life to I guess you went to the reserves, so you were still in the military, but going into, okay, I'm going to get a civilian job as well. I'm going to start doing this entrepreneurship thing. I'm into baking. I'm into farming. How did that look? What was the first steps of that transition?
Yeah, so we made the decision after our second deployment to get out of the Army. And I remember I walked into my battalion commander's office, and he said, "So, what are you going to do on the outside? What are you going to do on the outside?" And I said, "Sir, I think I'm going to farm." And
He's
suffice it to say,
okay.
that was not well received, especially in that organization. And it sounded outlandish to me, but that's what Fawn and I really wanted to do. And my dad had offered his property here in Virginia for us to kind of get this farming thing out of our system on his land. And I think to work through many of the startup problems. And
Shout out to Greg Shear.
Thank you, Dad. And so we transitioned from the Army. I knew I would need cash flow outside of the farming startup to make it work financially. And so I went to Firefighter Academy here in Virginia, and when I was a firefighter for 2 years with the idea of we needed some supplementary income to fund the venture. But we were convinced that we were going to do farming. We were going to do meat and veggies.
How did you go? What was we talked about last time, the baking book that was so instrumental for you to just start thinking about other things you were naturally passionate about, but maybe doing a bakery. How did it shift to farming in this season as the pursuit?
Yeah, we got hooked by the Joel Salatin books, and we were convinced that we too could be farmers.
You can farm.
Right. And the bread was, I think the takeaway from the Tartine book was this guy had pursued his passion and made it his profession. And to us, that was farming at the time. The bread really hadn't become an item. And so we were convinced that we were going to do meat and veggies. And in doing so, we could have that rich family life that we were after. And that's why we did. So when I came back from that first deployment, we dabbled in pigs and veggies and chickens and had a little hobby farm in Washington State prior to my second deployment. So we had kind of already had that in our system, and that's where we thought the money was to float the boat. And so we started doing that, and after farming at my dad's, we bought our current property, 8 acres, and we moved from my dad's to do the farming on that 8 acres. And we realized that with that acreage that a market garden doing vegetables was the most quote unquote lucrative way to do the business. And I was still a part of the National Guard at the time. So I was firefighting and I was in the National Guard. And so we had cash flow to fund the business.
Market garden try to get that off the ground. Yeah, because it's definitely an acre or 2 acre garden can produce a ton of food, but raising livestock on 8 acres is possible for certainly a homestead or a few households, but you're not going to be able to hit any kind of profitable production with your conventional livestock like cattle or chickens or pigs or whatever.
And yeah, it didn't take us very long to realize that the acreage wasn't going to support the large number of animals that we would need to support the business. And the one sticking point in the vegetable operation, we had a 20-member CSA, and we thought, man, we're doing this. This is great, but I would have to leave consistently for the National Guard to do training. Fawn was pregnant. I'd come back from 3 weeks away, and the garden would just be out of control. And so we had missed harvesting windows, missed planting windows, and looking
how many
at
kids did you have at the time?
We had 3 at the time.
Yeah.
And I just remember coming home, Fawn was standing in the middle of the garden, head to toe, dirt and sweat, pregnant, in the middle of the day, and she was just like, I hate this. Yeah. And we just couldn't stay at the head of the weeds. It just felt overwhelming as we considered what that would look like. And I think what I want to remember, and what's helpful to remember and helps me appreciate where we're at now, is just we were so dedicated to doing this full time. That's what we wanted. That's what we were grinding for and working towards. We were going to make this work full time. We thought if we just eat beans and rice for the rest of our lives, we're okay with that because we'll be as a family. And so the work piece, Fawn in the midst of the garden, me still going away, it felt very overwhelming. That's what we wanted to do, but it felt very overwhelming. And I think the doubt about whether this was achievable started to creep in with the small acres, with the veggie operation, with me leaving. It was like, I don't know if we can do this. And so there was a lot of fear in that, because this is why we had left the military, something that I was really good at, to do this. And now we're struggling and we can't seem to make it work. And that's when the bread pursuit really took shape. And so we were selling vegetables. We were driving to Washington, D.C., so a 3-hour trip. That's where we had a community of friends who were buying our product. So we'd bring a pittance of veggies to them.
Pittance.
And we drive back. We'd make $150 for the week.
Oh, man,
and we're thinking, man, how can we do this better? So I started baking bread on the side to send with those veggies to Northern Virginia. And so we're able to increase the offerings to those small number of families. So that's when we started first baking bread. And then we started baking bread and selling vegetables to the neighbors. We grew the CSA, the vegetable CSA, to 20, 25 members, and we're selling bread to those folks as well. So that was the growth of the business, was in the CSA, was in a little bit of bread, but also with the tension of I'm still working full-time off the farm, and the numbers are just not working out. And I remember our business plan from 2017 had unreal numbers in them. If we harvest 4 acres of carrots, and 72 hogs, like, we can make this work.
Yeah.
And there was so much naivety in there, but it took some time to realize that just wasn't realistic. So all these things are happening concurrently. But when I came back from that one training event and fawns in the middle of the garden, we thought we need to do something different. And so that was our first big pivot, was from the vegetables to the bread.
And was the bread, just as you're looking at the numbers, bread's way more profitable? I have heard with baking, flour is not expensive. Salt, these are really basic things you can buy in 50-pound sacks. Even the really quality salt and flour and sugar and whatever, it's something you can buy in bulk that is not super expensive. Is that why you chose the baking, or was it also a passion thing? How much of it was purely pragmatic?
Yeah, it wasn't the cost of goods and supplies. It was more the scheduling piece and the tending, the constant tending that the garden needed and the animals needed. We couldn't provide with
you
our
being
off
gone.
the farm
Yeah.
schedule. But what we could do was bake bread,
Mm-hmm.
and do so in a short window of time. And so that's when we started
Interesting. Gotcha.
selling every other Saturday. We'd sell veggies and bread out of a little shack off the side of our road. And that was the first bread day, is how we,
Really? Yeah, the first bread. I think I remember
the origins.
bread days in that building, which is now the mill, right? Where
It's now where we mill.
yeah.
But we were selling mostly vegetables out of that. It was like, think of a farm stand off the side of the road. People could pull over and pick up their pre-ordered vegetables. And they were just way more interested in the unique offering of sourdough bread than they were the vegetables. So the side hobby of baking had continued. And we realized that people were way more excited in our more agrarian society here in Rockbridge County, where every other person has a garden of their own. The bread was unique, the carrots less.
Yeah, that
so.
makes sense. So you guys, that was your niche. That's important. You guys found that niche sort of by
Right. And we didn't realize that, like, we should have been more keen to that from an earlier time, but it struck us. Oh, people are way more intrigued by these offerings than they are the vegetables. And so that was, as
Makes
we
sense,
were
yeah.
looking for that pivot, it took us a little bit of time to realize, but that was where we pivoted, was to the bread full time. So it didn't take long at all to abandon the vegetable operation and pursue the bread full time, and to increase our ability and proficiency in that skill, vice the vegetables. And that was driven by our off-farm schedule.
So you're okay, yeah. So you're working off farm, firefighting, still doing the reserves, and now you shift to purely focusing on the bakery side.
Right. And if I could just dive into that real quick
Yeah.
with the schedule, I had my National Guard duty, my firefighting schedule, so I could only bake twice a month. So
That's where bread days came
that's
from.
where bread days came from. So
Okay.
I would bake every other Friday to Saturday as the schedule would allow.
Yeah.
So the bread day every other week thing, which is really had traction, was born out of necessity at the beginning. It's the only window we could have to do long fermentation sourdough bread. It happened that way. So once we had decided to hang our hat on the bread offerings, my dad and I built a wood-fired oven in the backyard, and it was a bit of nostalgia, but also practical. That was our means of baking off a large quantity of loaves. So that oven we built it in 2017, and we're still using it in production for the bakery now. But
That is
schedule
really
piece-
cool to know. That's the origin of bread day. And so we met each other somewhere in this transition season. We met at church. I had heard you were farming. You had heard about our farm. So somebody connected us. Like, you guys got to meet each other, fellow farmers. And I remember, as you're talking about the scheduling, just to share this part of it, you would come back from work, or work at the firehouse, or being at an exercise for the reserves, and you would bake all night. You'd be prepping during the day, and then to have fresh bread in the morning, especially as it started to grow and you were making more bread, you'd be running that wood-fired oven all night from 8 or 9 o'clock, right? Until, because I remember guys would come over. You'd be like, "Hey, you guys want to come hang out with me?
Right.
I'm baking, and you can come hang till." We're like, "Oh, when are you hanging till?" Till
Whenever
dawn.
you want to go home, yeah.
Whenever you want to go home,
Right.
I'll be taking naps in between and
Right.
shifting through lows. So that, just thinking about, I think sometimes especially with entrepreneurial stuff, I do this. I think we all can do this, where you look at you today and you look outside looking at, wow, it's so cool what this guy's got. What a sweet niche bakery business with this coffee shop downtown. It's like, well, the reality was it started with you essentially having two other jobs and then baking in the only time windows you had, and you literally stayed up all night doing it. And also, not to paint the picture that you have to pay those specific dues, but there's an edge that it takes to make that jump for many entrepreneurs. It's just going to be part of the story. And I just wanted to highlight that part of your story, because I remember that well as your friend and thinking like, man, this guy's crazy. It's impressive that he can somehow stay up all night. And then the other last piece to that I'll mention is, the morning comes around, it's bread day, where people are arriving to your farm to pick up their bread. And again, the numbers are getting bigger and bigger, more and more people coming to get this product that is so good. And you're there too for that. You're talking to all these customers, and you've got to be on for that. You've got to be connecting with them, smiling, making sure they got their order, all these things. So I remember it just being an absolute marathon, and not just for you, but for Fawn as well, to get through those days. So, oh man, it's fun to think back on that now. What was that, 4 years ago?
4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
The first bread days. And that really, it's hard to describe those adequately to the listeners, but that was our cash cow for the young business. And that is where we experienced the most traction and the most financial success early on. Was people come, we realized that the farmers market piece, which a lot of bakers do initially, wasn't going to work for our growing family, just the logistics of getting out of the house to do it. And so what we could manage was hosting people on the farm. And so that was veggies originally, and then that transitioned to bread. But customers, we had a small email list. Customers would email their orders. I'd put out what loaves were available for that week, and people would put in their orders. And they would come by in a small window of time on Saturday, between 10 and 2, and pick up their bread. Fawn and I and the kids would be out there, conversing with them, talking about them, getting to know them.
I remember you made a little sort of hangout area there, because we would come and it'd be kind of like there'd be some chairs, and that's where the bread day we see now, it's where it started. Like, people want to come. They don't just want to pick up their bread. Like, we want to see our friends, Ben and Kristen, friends of ours that don't live in our town. They live in the next town north of us, but we would see them at bread day. So we'd come hang out for 45 minutes, an hour. The kids would play. We'd talk with other people picking up bread. Just me and Jill as customers. And that's so fun to think back to those days.
It was, and to realize from a business standpoint of how we can capitalize on the people wanting to linger here. People were interested in their bread and staying for a while. So that has led to many growth opportunities for Bread Day as well. So now we have a full espresso bar and have 4 baristas running coffee now. That's part of Bread Day now. We have, 4 people working behind the counter.
Live music, most
live
bread
music,
days now.
and then the additional offerings of whole hog barbecue and wood-fired pizzas in the oven. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Those things
it's so cool.
led to each other, and it's not. We never have had a master plan.
Well, let me ask you this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just taking advantage of the opportunities that come to you. I think we've tried to be flexible enough to do so.
So when was could you give us like maybe even a number, a monetary? When was the point where you're like, okay, I think we can make this much doing bread? Or was there a point where you're like, wow, we are making this much doing bread, I don't need to go into the office? Because somewhere in there you transition from being a firefighter to working at Virginia Military Institute. And then also somewhere in there, there's the bakery was making enough that you said, hey, I'm going to step away from conventional employment and do this bakery full time. What was there a number you hit, or how was that decision made?
There were two big financial points along the way of realization for us. The first was we had a bread day early on where we had a uniquely high number of pre-orders, and we grossed $1,000. This is in 2018, and there was a newspaper article written about us in the local paper, and so the following bread day we grossed $2,000. So
like,
rapid percentage growth, but really not much money. If we're doing this twice a month, then we grossed $1,000.
Yeah.
But to us, it was this watershed moment of when I remember looking at Fawn and saying, we can do this. Like, this is it. And just feeling so empowered and encouraged, and all the, the difficult work and scheduling pieces leading to that moment of the realization and the hope. Oh, we can do this.
Yeah.
That was a very significant moment to us and gave us a lot of motivation going forward to continue doing what we were doing. So that was the first piece financially. So after that, I still had the off-farm work. I transitioned from being a firefighter to going full-time guard at VMI as an instructor with the ROTC department. So still maintained the bread schedule, but had a higher off-farm income to help us build the bakery. So during this time, we were baking out of the house in what is now our master bedroom, and I would be embarrassed to describe what was going on in the bakery.
No. Do tell the... I remember the room in your house that you have a really cool old farmhouse, and there is sort of a funny room under your stairs. It's like it's your pantry, but it's really big, especially for an old farmhouse. I remember that room had like sacks of flour.
Right.
What's now your master bedroom was full of sacks of flour and scales, and
right.
it was quite...
It was just, there was a thick layer of flour over everything in the bottom of the house.
Yeah. Oh.
4 bins of dough proofing over by the fire in the living room. The kids playing blocks here, Fawn homeschooling the kids here, and me kneading dough late into the night. So we were very intertwined, life and business, but it didn't feel like there was any future in it.
Yeah.
So Fawn said, we've got to get you out of the house. So what can we do? So we decided to build a bakery on the farm. And that was the simplest solution for us, was to build a bakery. And I was very hesitant to do so because I was concerned about, hey, all we had to show for this is $1,000 bread days. Like, that's just not going to cut it as we talk about building a huge structure. So Fawn said, why don't we do an Airbnb atop the bakery to help cash flow the business? And that has proved to be such a great... Every good idea we've had has come from Fawn. But we did that. So we had, just talking a little bit of number here, we had $150,000 nest egg saved from the Army. And I wish it had been more, and it could have been more, but I had been a little frivolous with other pursuits. But we had this $150,000 nest egg, and we used every penny of that to build the bakery and the Airbnb. So we went all in on that opportunity.
And this was during your employ at VMI. So you had a little bit of a safety net of like, well, we know we are going to be making money with my job for the foreseeable future. But you went all in on the on the bakery building?
Yeah, it took about a year to build the bakery and the Airbnb, and so during that time, I was still employed by VMI. So I had an income from the outside, and had used our savings to build the bakery. So that period was about a year before the bakery was finished, and meanwhile, the bread days continued to grow, which was really encouraging. So that when we had our grand opening on a bread day in September of 2020 amidst COVID. It was a banner day financially for us. And that is when it was on that grand opening that we thought, okay, I'd feel comfortable walking away from full-time off-farm employment to do the bakery full-time. And at that point, things were very untenable scheduling wise. I'd stay up all night Thursday to Friday and make pastry. We were hand laminating all the pastry dough, and then
what is hand laminating?
Well,
pastry has layers. So
pastry has
okay.
many layers of butter and dough, and what we have now is a nice machine to assist in that pressing and laminating process. Laminating is the pressing of the dough and the dough and the butter layers, putting those together. So there's
a layer of dough, butter.
Right. And so to hand do that is superior craft. It just takes a long time. So I would do that through the night, Thursday to Friday, jet to work for meetings and to be an instructor at VMI, and then come back Friday night, stay up all night and do bread into bread day Saturday. So, over 48 hours of just go, go, go. So things were untenable. That just wasn't sustainable. Yeah. And so we made the decision to leave the military in January of 2021 after the bakery had been opened for 4 to 5 months. We thought we have enough cash flow, or at least enough promise of cash flow to make this work if we continued on that trajectory. So that the first $1,000 bread day, and then the grand opening, I think we grossed $10,000 on bread day, if I remember correctly. And those were the two pivotal moments of we can do this.
Yeah. Man, what a time. I forgot it was 2020 when you guys did the first grand opening of the new barn bread day. We did an event that year here at the farm as well. And we've done that event since. It's a burger night that we've done. Mm-hmm. And the one in 2020 was by far the most attended. And I just think of that for you guys, what timing that you couldn't have planned. But I think so many people in 2020, especially by that time in September, when it was like, okay, we can gather again, people were ready to go out. And I remember that bread day. How many people do you think were there? 400 maybe? I think
there were 700 or 800.
Yeah, maybe.
People.
Yeah, okay, I was way off. I remember pulling up, even just the field you park in was like, oh my goodness. It was a sea of people. It was so cool to see, especially from that shack by the road with maybe 10 or so families
to the bakery,
hanging out to the bakery with 800 people at the grand reopening. So you had that big 2020. You have that big first day of the bread barn and Airbnb launch. This is sort of a dumb question maybe, but I guess two parts. When did you transition? Had you transitioned out of full-time employee by that launch?
5 months after the launch, I did.
Okay. So I'd love to hear about just what that was like, because that's a big part of every entrepreneur's, well, not every, but many entrepreneurs' story is going from that full-time employee to doing their own thing full-time. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And I'd love to know a little bit about like how that felt, knowing what you shared of basically put your whole nest egg into building this barn bakery / Airbnb, doing these bread days and filling the nights at the Airbnb. Financially, like, what was that? Did you feel a year from then, was it comfortable? A month from then, where you're like, whew, that was a great decision. So what was it like on the deciding side, and what was emotionally, relationally with the family, any of that? What was it like on the financial side too, for going from that full-time business or full-time job to entrepreneurship?
So Fawn and I are quite optimistic with her ideas, with my ideas, almost to a fault. Not quite to a fault, but almost to a fault. So that, coupled with the fact we're also very risk tolerant, there was an apprehension about leaving. I think we were very convinced, rightly or wrongly, that this was going to work, and we had the evidence to show for it with bread days that just seemed to be busting at the seams.
Mm-hmm.
And with this was mid-COVID, with this hunger from the community for community. And it just seemed that Bread Day was custom fit to meet that need in the community. And we thought and anticipated that that would outlast and go beyond when COVID was finished running its course. So that has very bullish on the idea, and we were so excited for the opportunity. It didn't feel like there was any room for apprehension. That was on one piece. For me personally, leaving the Army was significant, and the emotional piece was difficult because my identity felt so deeply rooted in the military. To break from that, even for an exciting new pursuit, was really hard, and has proved to still be really hard as I wrestle with that.
Yeah, continue to unpack the layers of that identity.
So that was, it's so deeply rooted in our family, which I spoke to last time we chatted, and the fact that I was doing well at it, and I found great purpose in it, and I loved wearing the uniform, loved serving the country, found to be very noble and purposeful work. To purposely shift gears from that to this new pursuit, I continue to wrestle with that. So there is definitely a ongoing struggle there. Would I change it? No. Do I regret it? No. Do I think what I'm doing now is just as or more purposeful and purposeful and noble because it's centered on the family, vice my personal pursuits? I do think so, but it's still very hard. Mm-hmm. So that was personally. Financially, we knew we knew we could slip by on very little, and that was encouraging to us. We were growing a lot of our vegetables still, even though we weren't selling them. We were eating our own meat. You know, there were a lot of costs growing family-wise that we absorbed into the farm.
Yeah, you kind of took the production market garden to a homestead level, and you did it. I feel like maybe you almost added more livestock because you had a couple steers you put in your big pasture. Mm-hmm. You had the hogs. You had chickens in the field.
Yeah, we raised enough meat and vegetables to pay for the food that we were eating on our table, if that makes sense.
Yeah, selling that at the bread days.
Right, that seemed to be the best way for us to continue to do what we loved and work the land and make a modicum return on it. So the finances, we had drained our savings. We were operating off our income only, and I don't remember any financial apprehension. I think there were several voices outside looking in that were cautiously or recommending us towards caution, vice taking the jump, and from people we respect very much. And so that was, I had to wrestle through that because it felt like, are we being brash? Are we being dumb? Is this going to backfire? But those were fleeting thoughts. I think we were so excited about doing our dream job.
That's awesome. Yeah, there'll always be those voices. I think in your own head, there will be those voices of, what am I doing right now? You know, when it's the middle of the night and you're baking and wherever it might be, you have those moments of doubt. So just human. That's going to happen. And yeah, to have people in your life voicing those, that's human. I know Jill and I were probably on the other end of that, like, build a bigger barn. Like, you guys can do it.
Yeah, having your friendship amidst that time was awesome because you guys were already well on your way entrepreneurially, and yeah, it was so encouraging having you all as friends. The other big encouragement in this was making the decision to leave the military was in large part because of my relationship with Fawn, and she never asked me to leave the military, but it felt awesome to make a decision that benefited her.
Yeah.
And that was very encouraged. It felt like that helped us weather any difficulty or slim times financially transitioning because we felt so assured in, and I felt so assured in that this was so good for our relationship and that it was strengthening our relationship, that even though, the dollars may not support as much this month from our income, but man, we feel so on point and together in this. That was huge encouragement as we started as this entrepreneurial thing.
Man, I love that. That is so important, I think, for me to hear, for anybody listening to hear, that when you're, especially if you're married, when you're connected with your spouse in what you're doing, when you know there's that mutual support, that's really powerful and a gift. What a gift to you that Fawn just stood, not forcing you out, not leaning on you. You got to get out of the military or anything, but was patient with you, as I can imagine her being. And man, that's encouraging for me to think about when I think about success as an entrepreneur. There's obviously, you want your business to work, you want to make money, you want to have a effect in the world, that a positive effect that you're causing. And then really at the core of that, though, for I know for me and for you, is such a family component that matters the most, starting with your spouse, being connected in that venture, whether it's making us a ton of money or not. If it's working and we're connected, then that's what matters most. And it's interesting how when you're there, all of a sudden all these possibilities seem so much more achievable, and there's energy to go do it versus feeling like unsupported, zero energy to go do it. Like you're just striking out on your own. It's interesting how one begets the other, of that connectedness, that mutual support, that leaning on each other for each other's strengths, and then the economic possibilities or the effect that you want to have in the world with your business, that growing because of that base of support. So cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, and thinking about all the guests that we have lined up, a lot of them have similar, not everybody's the same, but similar support stories about how they've worked together on the venture with their spouse. And not everybody will have this, but we can certainly speak to it as how much better we are working together with our spouse on this. I don't think you would be where you are. I wouldn't be where I am.
Podcast business wouldn't be where it is.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Looking legit.
Right. If we didn't have that spot, I can't say enough about how exciting that is for me to be working together with Fawn on something. And that, from very early on, our vision was to nourish the community with the food products as a family, that this was going to be a family pursuit. And we put that on paper very early. And I think now we're in a position to look back and see how rich that has been, to make that foundational to what we're doing, is that we're going to do it together, Fawn and I, shoulder by shoulder. And now that the children are now contributing to this, it feels so rewarding. And we could not be where we're at if this was going to be my thing, or if it was going to be her thing. Like, this is only a product of doing this together, which is really exciting for us. And looking towards the future, what is possible because we're doing this together, vice separately.
Yeah. So, tell me about where you're at now. I'm interested to hear, how are Bread Days going 3 years in? How you launched the cafe. I think that would be cool to hear a good bit about as well. And I'd love to hear a little bit about where you're heading, what your dreams are for the next thing. So, how are Bread Days going right now?
Yeah, Bread Days continued to gain steam from the grand opening, 3 years ago. it's been on a continually increasing trajectory, climbing trajectory.
And you do
financially and
wholesale
people's-
now too. You use wholesale to a bunch of
Yeah, so we have several branches of the business now. So bread days are one, still occurring twice a month. And then we have 10 wholesale accounts for bread and pastry in our county and in the surrounding counties as well. So those account for about 20% of our gross per month. And then we have the cafe. About a year ago, we opened the cafe in Lexington. So we were given the opportunity to operate a bakery cafe in town. So we rent a restaurant right on Main Street, and we're open 6 days a week from 7 to 2. And our purpose,
Come on out.
yeah, our purpose in it was to offer the bread day feel of
Yeah.
community and hospitality on a more regular basis in town. And it's going really well. So about 50% of our gross is from the cafe, and the remaining whatever percentage that is.
Yeah, and
30 is
Yeah.
from bread days.
And you guys employ a good number of people now. How many employees do you guys have now?
We have 6 full-time, including myself, and then we have 13 part-time that work a varying number of hours through the week.
Yeah, at the cafe or at the
Bread
home
day.
farm bakery bread day. Cool. Man, that's wild. So where do you see all this going? Do you want to we've had the conversation before that we haven't revisited in a while actually as friends of, is there quote enough? Is everything that you've got going now with the bakery where you want to be, or is there something else next that you see that you're leaning into? How do you is there enough? Is this have you arrived? Are you comfortable with this, or do you want to do more? What's the tension there for you?
Yeah, I think we should spend a whole episode talking about what's enough as an entrepreneur. And I think we should ask our guests that question too,
Yeah,
because I
that's a
think
good
it's
idea.
really intriguing. I think we feel like a perennial entrepreneur. Is perennial the best word? Just this ongoing interest in trying something new, expanding, going into a different market, offering a different product that seems insatiable. Not from a financial standpoint, from just almost a hobby standpoint. Or just we're always, and I know that you're the same way, just always thinking about how to do things different, do things better, try something new. And so in that aspect, I don't think there's enough. I don't think there can be enough of that. I think that's some part of me, some part of you that we're always going to have to tap into to feel alive, if that makes sense. And I feel like to not do that would be to stifle some big part of us.
Yeah.
So in that sense, no. But I think what you're asking is where we're at financially, operationally, is it enough? Could we stop where we're at and be okay? And I think the answer for where we're at right now is no. And the reason for that is with having so many employees, I don't want to employ people at the least possible hourly rate or salary for this profession. I'd love to be the bakery and that offers the best benefit package, that offers the highest salaries, and in doing so attracts the top performers in our industry, and just foster a employee focused business model where they are not resources, they're just valued members of the team. We can show you that with what we're providing you in exchange for your labor. And so because that is a focus, I'm not where I want to be with salaries for our employees. And so I want to make more money in order to make that possible. And lifestyle wise, there's a lot of things Fawn and I would like to do that we can't do now. Lifestyle wise, we talked about traveling. We would love to do that more, and generating, or just frankly speak, generating more income will provide those opportunities. Could we stop here? Yes, and we'd be so grateful. But I think there's opportunities that we don't want to say no to. So some of those, just throwing it out, and I haven't fleshed these out. Fawn and I haven't arrived at what's next, but we would love to own our own establishment in Lexington. We'd love to own our own storefront for a cafe and bakery in
Oh yeah, because you guys
Lexington.
are leasing where the bakery is.
We're just
downtown
renting right now.
Yeah, or renting, yeah.
And I would love to add an asset to our portfolio and that of the businesses for sure. So that would be one thing. And I think what we're doing in the bakery and cafe in Lexington is easily replicable in our surrounding area.
Yeah.
And there is
Oh, maybe like another location somewhere.
another location
Ooh,
somewhere.
That would be cool.
Because what we're doing, and we have the bakery at our farm, which is the hub of operations and production. So the bakery produces all the baked goods and all the breakfast and lunch items, and then they are driven to our cafe in town. So it's none of the production is done on site. It's just retail. And so that there's an ease of opening another location materially, resourcing wise, because everything's produced at the farm.
Gotcha.
So I
yeah.
think that model we can replicate in other locales around the area. So
that would be really cool.
that's one piece. I really like that, and we have staffing that can support that growth. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lexington's, it's interesting. I love the goal of getting a place in Lexington that you own. And our town is interesting because it's so small. It's only about 10,000 people. That's, I guess, in the whole, I think that's in the whole county.
County's a little bigger. Town's 7,000.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So altogether it's about 10, but the it's a very limited amount of real estate, and there's two colleges on the outskirts of our town, basically in the town. Washington Lee University and VMI. So you've got a lot of competing forces for any property that comes up, and most of the properties are historic, these beautiful brick historic buildings that the town looks like my mom always says, I feel like I'm in a Hallmark movie or something when you're on Main Street, and mountains all around. It's just gorgeous. So yeah, it would definitely be a good investment if you could find the right place. And it is it's tough, right? Because some people, the people that own real estate there that are considering selling, they know everything I just said.
Right. There's high value.
Yeah, that you happen to be out here in the small town, but there is demand because of the college is always looking for more properties because there's limited inventory on those few little quaint main street and side streets that we have. But I love that. I hope you guys find the right spot.
Yeah, we're hoping, praying,
Yeah.
keeping our eyes out.
And I haven't heard you talk about expanding into other locales. That makes a lot of sense because if your bakery at the farm can produce more, why not? You've got such a great baking team now that you've put together. So it's not just you baking every single thing. You've got a whole crew that
Yeah, and
can specialize.
speaking to the crew, and I think what makes what we're doing unique, not universally, but in our locale, is our employees are just outstanding, and the way they demonstrate hospitality and care for the customer when the customer walks in. I think that's our most unique product. I think the bread and pastries are on point, and we're just steadily improving those. But I think that feeling that the customers get where they come to Bread Day or the cafe, that idea of being nourished when they come to our establishment, I think that's what makes the idea of having a cafe in the other areas. There's no shortage of coffee and pastry in the other towns, but I think that that offering is what is most unique to what
I've
we
noticed
offer.
that about going into the cafe and of course Bread Days. How do you build that in your team? How do you build that culture?
That's a great question. One, one thing that I would like to say, shout out to my mother. One piece that's been really awesome about the business is that it has taken the whole family. And so you go into the cafe in Lexington, and my dear mother works every Monday.
She is a saint.
And you
She's
are the most...
literally one of the sweetest people
She
I
is,
know. I
yeah.
mean, and I'm not... Most people that know your mom would say that.
Yes, she objectively is. And I'm biased, but she objectively
No,
is.
she is. She truly is.
Yeah, and so you walk in, and you now are the most important thing to her. You, the
Yeah.
customer.
That's right.
And she will ask you many questions about your life before you even get your order, for a caramel macchiato out. That's, and so honestly, she has been a huge reason for this culture within our business about nourishing people and the care for the customer.
Kind of leading by example there.
She propagates that with every word that comes out of her mouth. So
She met my mom at church maybe twice. And you grew up in Northern Virginia. She was up in Northern Virginia. Your mom was up in Northern Virginia for something. And she knows that my mom still lives up in Northern Virginia. So she went to visit her she's only met my mom like twice. She's like, I'll be in the area,
just a
Nancy.
cold call.
Yeah, just to go say hi, and like had a cup of coffee with her and hung out. And like, my mom's telling me this. I'm like, wait, you're talking about Daniel's mom came to see? She's like, yeah, she was in town. Just the sweetest.
Yeah. And she does
Just
that
the
to so
sweetest.
many people, and it's genuine. It's not
Yeah.
made up. And I think I've learned more about how to treat people. That's not what you get in the military. So there's been some unlearning and relearning. But I think, honestly, she is that answer to your question. How do we establish that? I think we are careful with who we hire. And then kind of the orb of my mom, she really encourages our other staff people to be customer focused. So
so lead by example, hire well.
Yeah, and
You
that's
guys have
not
been fortunate to
taking
hire a lot
away
of great
from
people.
who we've hired, like in their natural giftings. But you might not be great at making a coffee, but if your interpersonal is on point, that can overcome. We can teach you
how to
we can
make
do the
coffee.
technical pieces,
Yeah.
but you can't teach how to care for people. And so, I think that's been a huge reason for culturally where we're at. Fawn and I would like to take credit for that. I don't think we can. I think that's a personnel who we've hired and their natural inclination to care for people. And then certainly my mother. Love you, Mom.
That's right. I was trying to remember. Where are we? Sweet Marlene. So it was really cool to hear the second part of your story after military life, from having this crazy idea to be a farmer, that morphing into becoming a baker, the baking becoming a full-time gig for you, and then this growing thing that just seems to have this huge momentum to it, where you start the cafe and it's a home run. Bread days keep growing. You've got wholesale accounts, maybe new cafe locations on the horizon. Really, really encouraging for me to hear, thinking about all the stuff we're working on. Just love it, man. So for anybody who's listening who has a crazy idea too, like you did, what's one thing you'd say to them whether they've already started, whether they're thinking about starting, whether they're in that growth stage that you guys are in right now? What's one big takeaway, one thing you can call them up with?
I have two things.
Ooh, okay.
The first is being faithful to your vision throughout and I wouldn't say we're at the end of our journey, but 7 years in, write your vision down at the onset and be faithful to hold to that. There's so many unique opportunities that have popped up that we've said no to because it wasn't consistent with what our vision was for our enterprise and our family. So that was the first thing. Faithfulness to your vision. And the second thing to encourage people with, and to encourage them to find and seek out, is community. There is such a powerful force that comes with surrounding yourself as an entrepreneur with like-minded people, or that people who are going to speak directly into your life, encouragement in your venture. That doesn't mean it's blindly saying, hey, great, this is a great idea, but asking you questions, being interested in what you're doing enough to ask questions, to hold you accountable to what that vision is and your decision making. People are going to lean into you and move towards you. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has a supportive spouse. Not everybody's family can work the cafe. So you have to build that community sometimes. But once you have it, and I'm looking at you, looking at Jill, and thinking what awesome forces behind our friendship, I think that opens so many doors. That is so empowering when you're doing something risky like being an entrepreneur.
Love that, man. I feel the same way. Love you. It's such a blessing to have each other in the pursuits we're doing, and I know it's beyond our friendships. I'm excited to have a few other friends on in the future that have also been that community for us.
Hear, hear.
Awesome. Well, that was great. I think that's a wrap.